Sir Bill, how's it going?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Y-
You can hear me all right?
Yes, yes, I
Awesome.
can.
Awesome. I already pre-recorded an intro, but just to before I become professional, I just want to let you know, huge fan. I
Oh,
think
well, thank you.
I think there's so many lasagna layers to your history and personality about being both like exposing the food from Mexico and being from California. I think a lot of people have to appreciate that because that's not commonly spoken of. You're kind of
Yeah.
like this unique bridge, if I could use that term.
Well, I sort of consider myself an insider outsider, and that does, yeah, that's. I mean, I think for all of us that are, you know, Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, Salvadoran Americans, we do, we can have the ability to have this appreciation for the culture that people that live there would, just like I live in Hollywood, and I'm like, I don't go to the Walk of Fame and uh, and hang out there. I don't appreciate it, but when I drive by, I see like, man, all these people really want to see this and they really want to experience it. It's a weird thing. And I never even send anybody there, but I think I appreciate Hollywood in a very different way living here. Same thing, if you're living in another country, you just don't see your food in the way an outsider, when we travel, we want to experience a certain thing. We have this like very like mindset about what we want, and it really gets to be distilled into like what's really, like any travel guide says, where to stay, what to eat, what to do. It gets distilled into these things, and I think I'm able to see that in a different way than people who live there uh, can't.
I think a lot of this misunderstanding and racial tension could be erased if uh, Jeff Bezos just funded people to travel the world, so that way you can just accept everyone's differences and go, "Oh, that's cool. I like that." It's one of those things where someone like you get to travel, and really it's like fruitional experience. You feel it and you taste it. The digestion of it versus just watching something.
Yeah, you do have to see how people live in other places, and how and 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 not see it through the old, I guess what's been called the ugly American traveler. And that the ugly American one thing that's not mentioned about the ugly American travel is they really don't want to learn. They almost come with this idea of like, I'm American, we everything we do is better, we have democracy, you don't, we have this, we have that. And so you come there, and you've seen it before on like your family members. I mean, before there was Facebook, there was always these like, yeah, I went to Russia, and boy, they really have it bad over there. They're not like us over here, all civilized. And there was that sort of mentality that you're not like, did you not learn anything there? Did you not see anything? Did you not experience anything? Did you not listen to people? Is there only just rich and poor, and that's it? There's no other experiences, and there's, and even like a place like Cuba for me, everyone like, oh, it's a communist nation, blah blah blah. They don't have freedoms, they don't have this, they don't have that. But then when you get there and you talk to people, there's a lot there's a lot of nuances and layers that you would never know, if you didn't actually spend some time there.
Yeah, and I feel like the internet is both a gift and a curse, but for fair minded people who want to enjoy other cultures, it's such a great tool to utilize and learn and unlearn premeditated thoughts of other people.
Yeah.
And one thing I did want to talk about, and I know you've been asked this to death, so we'll go on a contextual timeline.
All
You
right.
you grew up in Stockton, and then you
Yes.
eventually moved to the Bay, which is a brown centric culture too. But what was the migration from Stockton to the Bay relatively quick? Like, were more your formative years at the Bay already?
Well, I mean, if you grow up in Central California, especially Stockton, where you're right in the middle, the armpit of California, you spend weekends in. I mean, Sacramento's not so exciting, but when you're younger, you go to Sacramento, you to go see historical things, and Old Town Sacramento family outings. But we spent a lot of time going to San Francisco, Oakland. So if you want to go see a concert, you were in San Francisco. You didn't go to, there's no concerts in Stockton. We had a little theater, have a little theater. And so, you know, my dad was very much a Chicano hippie biker crowd, you know, that. And so for him, you know, my dad saw Hendrix, you know, he saw Led Zeppelin in the 70s. And so for him, he was always going to San Francisco to see concerts, and he would take us too. So we were always going there, always going. So I got to know the Bay Area very well. Sports, our teams were the Giants or the Oakland A's. So we saw games at Candlestick, you know, we saw games at the Oakland Coliseum. I saw my first concert that I can remember, like a rock concert, was Van Halen in like 80, 81 at the Oakland Coliseum Arena. So the Bay Area is part of your DNA if you're from Stockton and you do want to get out of town. You know, you have enough means, and that's the thing. It doesn't take much. You don't need a lot of money to go spend the day in San Francisco. Back then, you didn't anyway.
So I assume that influenced you quite a bit because you were a musician also before you became a writer. So
Yeah.
you attending concerts, your dad being that wide-minded and involving you to his activities, like attending concerts. Was it pretty easy for you to develop the love for the saxophone, or was that like, did you go through a myriad of choices? Do I go with keys or go with a guitar?
No, I mean, I would say that the saxophone found me, you know,
Hmm.
and so I grew up listening to, you know, I actually just retrieved my dad's record collection from storage uh,
Hmm.
just this last year during during the pandemic. I had been wanting to go. It's been in storage, so I was looking through it and I was thinking, you know, I remember listening to this stuff, but I didn't realize how sophisticated my dad's musical tastes were. So you know, I was hearing Santana. I mean, I remember Santana being played a lot, and I also remember this group Passport. Passports is really kind of avant-garde European jazz fusion band that came out in the 70s that you know, when people talk about Miles, they don't really talk about Passport, but they were very obscure. But my dad was into Passport. Of course, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Billy Cobham, you know, George Duke, all those jazz fusion artists we were listening to, and we were listening to the 70s horn bands, you know, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Tower Power. Um, and so I was always hearing the saxophone. I mean, you know, today you don't really hear it on the radio anymore. It's been gone from the radio for a long time now, but back then it's pretty common to hear saxophone and horn sections on the radio. So and you know, and my home, and my dad played records pretty much all day long. So there wasn't really a quiet time in the house. It was just music. So I started grabbing instruments. Like there was a guitar around our house, and I started playing with that. And then one day in fourth grade, the music teacher come, you know, back when we had music programs in schools. I mean, we had a bigger elementary program, I think, than a lot of high schools have these days, you know. But a woman came to the class and she's like, "Who wants to sign up for a band?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's what I want to do." Like, I didn't know that that's what you do. And so I wanted to play saxophone, but the music store didn't have one. And so they lied to me and they said that I was too small for it. And so I was like, you know what? This is a bunch of bull. So I just said, I'll just take the flute. You know, I didn't like the trumpet. I didn't like the sound of the clarinet. So I was like, okay, I'll do the flute. So I started on flute. And as soon as I could get my hands on a saxophone, because, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, I think sixth grade, the teacher had one. And I just said, can I take it home? And I took it home and I practiced and I learned it on my own and started playing in band the next week on the saxophone. So that's where that happened.
So I assume there wasn't much resistance from your parents for you to
No,
pursue that as a career also in the very beginning?
no, no, there wasn't really much. I mean, it was right around that time. I think my parents also separated too. So you know, that was their distraction. But nobody really ever bothered me about. I didn't have a lot of restrictions as a kid, and I didn't have a lot of. I mean, I sort of just did my own thing, you know, and so the music was just all me.
So you mentioned before that you were touring in Japan, and then a lot of your bandmates were like, "Dude, I'm gonna buy like a bag of Fritos," but you were like, "No, I'm trying Japanese food, and it's
Yeah,
expensive."
yeah. I mean, I think right away, as soon as I started traveling, I didn't really know. I mean, as a kid, I didn't get a lot of opportunities. I had a handful of opportunities to travel, mostly with my grandparents, not my, you know, my parents can afford it. My dad wasn't really that type. So when I started traveling, the first thing that hit me was like, oh my God, I can actually experience some things here that I can't other places. And but yeah, when I went to it was weird. I was thinking, you know, musicians are funny, you know. They you get this idea of like saving money, and we get a per diem, and that per diem is supposed to be spent on your food, and obviously that's something you negotiate, and that's a big part of the gig. But a lot of musicians look at that like, okay, that's part of my paycheck. So we're in Tokyo, and these guys are going to the 7-Eleven and they're getting ramen and loading up, and they're so proud of that, like, oh my God, I spent like nothing this week. And I'm like, what the hell are you like? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so I was just walking around, and this was before, of course, I didn't have the ability like I do now to to research things, and a knowledge of any cuisines really, except for Mexican food that I'd grown up with. Um, and so I just started walking around and trying things and going into random restaurants. I went down into the subway, and I found that there was levels and that there were restaurants down there. So I went into noodle shops and tried things, and just, you know, naturally open. And I didn't really care what it was. I just wanted to try it. And yeah, and that made me sort of a really small percentage. There are musicians that are very worldly, and they're if they play somewhere on a regular basis, they become sort of experts in that town or that culture, you know, what to do there. But um, I was part of a really small group of musicians who basically, you know, were used to sleeping on a mattress on the floor, saving all their per diem, you know, living with their in their girlfriend's place, the cheap bohemian musician life, you know. But I spent all my per diem, every cent and more.
Right. Did that feel like it was phasic? It was just a phase because you were like, "Oh, I'm more into food," or did that discovery eventually come that you wanted to become a writer?
Well, I mean, I think it just kind of happened. I was playing with this artist, and we were working a lot in Central America, and I was starting to play in Mexico, and I was starting to, you know, explore Latin America. And so when I came back from my trips, I'd always look around for those restaurants because I missed, like, I went to El Salvador for, I was there for maybe 2 days, right? But I ate so much around town in those 2 days that I came back in LA, and I started to realize, like, oh my God, we have like actually neighborhoods with all these Salvadoreño restaurants. And I started just going to every one of them. I didn't, at first I was just like, I'll just pick one and I'll try one next week, and next week I'll try another. And it was really more about like me connecting with what I was missing about a place. And so I mean, at one point, I remember when I'd play weddings and you know, what we call casuals, stupid corporate parties and stuff, playing Brick House, and I'd play in downtown LA, and I'd finish up, and I'd go to there was this one restaurant on Western in Koreatown that was half Salvadoran, half um, Honduran, and I had just gone to both of those places, so I was like, I was in love with this place. And it wasn't particularly exceptional food. It was very simple, but I just loved going there, drinking, you know, Salvadoran beer, having the food, and like the late night, really bad karaoke crowd that would come there and sing really loud. And way too much reverb. And so I just was, to me, it was just an adventure, you know? So I started to do that. I'd go to a state, I'd go to a town. I was looking for that food. And all of a sudden I started to realize that I could go into a restaurant and it's a Sinaloan cuisine from Culiacan. And I'd look at the menu. I'm like, wow, that's not the food I had over there. And so I started kind of writing a blog because I had heard about a blog to sort of keep track of where I was going. And then a few years into it, somebody put analytics on there for me, and a person in the food community. I was on Chowhound for a couple of
I remember.
years, and Chowhound too was one of those things where I got on there and I realized, wow, nobody knows about this food, and I started learning that if I post something or if I make a comment, people would get really pissed off, you know, like people get like, oh man, I don't understand this. I'm just saying that like that's not this cuisine, it's this because. And so, you know, and then when this person put analytics on, I started to realize that people were reading my blog, you know, and it's my blog started out just as whatever, but it started to get focused. I don't know. I decided that, you know, there's something interesting happening in all the Latin American cuisines, and I think there's an interest in it, and I should just like write about it, you know, and without really any plan, everything that happened after that sort of is an accident, you know.
I recently interviewed Jen Harris
Oh
from
yes,
LA
I saw
Times,
that.
which I need to talk to you about a project we're conjuring up, which maybe you might be interested in get involved with. Um, she dominantly eats Chinese food, but with all your traveling, is there a second culture that you consume as voraciously as much as Mexican food?
Well, I mean, because I traveled a lot in all over Latin America,
Sure.
it's really all of Latin America, and that's, you know, I would say that early on, the Mexican, you know, the Mexican food thing. I mean, there's people out there that see me as a writer of all that, like all I write about is tacos or something, you know, and to me, writing about that is just writing about Mexican cuisine. Mexican cuisine, all of our food is available in tacos, just about, except for like ceviche and a few things,
Sure.
but just about, and soup, you know, but everything else you can have we eat. That's the way we eat. Like, even if you don't get tacos, you get a plate, you have tortillas, and you're making little taquitos, and so it's kind of just part of the culture to me. But and other people think that I only do Mexican cuisine, you know, and I'm always fun. It's always funny when I'm in a professional setting, and people will say, well, like, yeah, you know, I'm going to introduce you to this guy, and he's an expert on Mexican cuisine or tacos, but I'm just as knowledgeable about and you know, I write about Brazilian cuisine, Colombian, Salvadoran, Guatemalan. I mean, I visited those places, um, and I have a fascination with their cultures as well. But outside of that, I really love. I'd say that I love seafood, so it doesn't really matter what part of the world that comes from to me. But um, I live in I live right here in Thai town. So I go to a lot of Thai restaurants. I go to a lot of Armenian restaurants. We have a little Armenia here in Thai town.
Live in Glendale.
Yeah, right. Oh, right. And I also have a lot of Oaxacan restaurants in my neighborhood. I only shop at basically Oaxacan markets and one Argentine market for the most part, you know. And then, so I really love those cuisines because, and Central American, you know, Guatemala and Salvador, but I also really love Japanese food, Middle Eastern, not just the Armenian, the different Armenians, the Persian Armenian cuisines, the Lebanese Armenian, but
Armenians
as
from
you know,
Russia.
right, Russian Armenian is not as good as the other ones, but it's interesting, and so I've always gone to those restaurants. So I'd say Middle Eastern, um, and various Asian cuisines that I really love. I mean, outside of Latin America, I've been to Thailand, I've been to Singapore, I've been to Japan like 3 times and 3 or 4 times. So those are places that I just won't go anywhere unless I'm forced to for some reason, for work or something. I'm not going to go anywhere that doesn't have great food. I'm just not going to do it on my own.
I'm going to sidebar this question real quick because There's an MMA fighter that I recently interviewed, and he grew up in
Yeah,
Japan. And I stayed in Singapore for a little bit during my formative years.
right.
So when it comes to meat on a stick, in your opinion, is it Japan or Singapore?
Oh,
And there's no wrong or right answer, It's just
yeah. I'm trying to think of like, like of course Singapore has satay and other, but I can't really. I would say I don't really know the range.
oh, okay. Or food
Japanese.
in general. How about food in general? Just compare both. Because a lot of people don't know of Singaporean food because it's three ethnicities.
Right, right. No, I mean, and that's the thing I was exploring when I was there is, and again, just the same thing, going to random. I was actually there for the first World Street Food Congress. I was Mexico's representative, and I had brought one of Mexico's representative, and I had brought La Guerrerense. That we went together, and I was really just their support mostly, but they were there selling at this totally failed event. Like I've never seen a bigger festival have zero people almost there. I've never seen a, a festival that poorly attended. It was phenomenal, like how few people showed up at this thing on a daily basis, and they did it way too many days. It was like 10 days straight, and it was starting from 8 a.m. until like midnight, and it was just the stupidest. They eventually got it together. Like the second year was much more successful. It just was, their first year and everything. But so, once I check in once a day, and the rest of the day I just go and I'd run around and eat. And that was sort of my like intention. Like, okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna support La Guerrerense, but I'm gonna go like, and I even one night I flew to Bangkok to get. I said, guys, are you guys okay if I just disappear for about
right.
a day and a half?
It's so close, anyways.
Oh yeah, no, I was in a food court, and they had all these travel agencies, offices around the food court, and I'm just like, I was seeing all these flights to, all to Malaysia, and they were all cheap. I'm like, oh my god, let's do the Bangkok one. And so I did that experience. That was amazing. Um, but yeah, I'd say that of course, Japanese has more diversity of cuisine, and it's different styles of Japanese cuisine. Singapore has just, it almost seems like it's always put together as a bunch of dishes, like the cultural dishes of Singapore,
Sure.
rather than regions, because it's just one city, a city state, you know. So it's like once you've checked off that list of dishes, uh, you've sort of accomplished, you've hit for the cycle in Singapore. But I do like, I think in general Japanese cuisine has all these little. I relate to it a lot because of the specialization that there is in I mean, Singapore has it too, but both of them are delicious.
That's interesting that you brought up this World Street Food Congress. I was in the Philippines when it was Bourdain's last year he was alive.
Right.
I actually, tried to meet him, showed my press pass, but KFCito was like so available because everyone ignored KFCito. And you're right, like the hours are so long and it's stretched for so many days. I think if they compacted that into like a weekend, it would feel so much more successful.
One day.
Sure, sure, sure. One day. Yeah, exactly.
Well, when you went, and when it was in the Philippines, and so yeah, I know KF Cito very well. He before the pandemic, he was in LA, and I had dinner with him here. But um, yeah, even after, even they shortened the hours and they shortened the number of days, it still was like way too much. It's like, but I think for KF Cito, it was always about like networking, and I kind of feel in a way that event was just really a front for their for their New York hawker market that they were gonna.
Sure. Bourdain Market.
I was like, we're all just here like helping Bourdain and KFC to like make millions in New York. Of course, it never happened, but no, that was a fun experience.
That's so astute of you to bring that up because I opened up my own LLC in Manila, and he was like, "Well, for this X amount," because there was a hawkers center in one of the malls in the Philippines. Delicious food, completely ignored, slept on. Just kind of like exactly what you're talking about. It's called the World Street Food Congress, and it's like you should go nuts. Especially like I supported. There was a lady that I think she was Salvadorian. I macked down on all the Latin foods because I wanted to show them love because it's like all the Filipinos were going headed towards the Asian food, but they're like, well, it's okay, but it's unfortunate. I'd love for like a hawker center to be developed here in LA, but I don't know how realistic that would be post pandemic.
It's the real challenge of these things is, and we go to these things all the time, and you always have these high expectations for these new markets. Even Grand Central Markets transformation. When you go there, there's still so much like lame food there, and even for and like for Mexican food, there's I mean there's vendor. It's very cool that they kept some of the vendors that were there before, especially the people that sell the chiles and things. But like the Mexican American food that's here is just like beans and rice combo plate things, and they don't have any really cool Mexican things in there. The carnitas place is cool, and the pupusa place, but everything else it doesn't really feel like what's hot in Los Angeles in terms of Mexican food. And so every time people all these markets want these vendors, they want the vendors, but they don't know how to give them deals and make the financial arrangements so that they can easily go in. They're landlords looking for people to rent space, and you can't develop a really cool market that way. You have to be more invested in the actual vendors and
Long
really,
term.
yeah, exactly. And so all these food court things are lame because the only people that can come in are like people that just want to do. You get these weird concepts that only exist in those markets by people who are trying to start a business or something, but not like having the cool vendors. If you're a Teddy's Red Tacos and you've got all your trucks, your businesses, they're making so much money, and then this hawker or food court comes along and says, hey, we'd love to have you here, and they like, but you have to pay this much rent and you're only going to get this much money, and they're like, why would I do that? I'm busy on the weekend and I'm making tons of cash, and like, why am I going to go into that? So it's hard from the business side for people to come up with the model that's going to really bring in that cool thing that you're talking about that would be wonderful. And then would people go to it? I mean, it's funny in the Philippines that you don't have an interest in that, but Walter Mansky's coffee shop is killing it over there.
Yep. Tim Horton. Oh, yeah, I mean, it's weird, like with third world Asians, it has to be almost like Western approved.
Yeah, they're like, we don't, give us some luxury, treat us like we deserve something nice.
Totally.
But it has to be, Western, exactly.
It's almost in a Kardashian entertainment presentation, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, the only backlash against the Kardashians is here in the United States. The rest of the world just loves.
Oh, they eat them up, man.
In Mexico, Brazil, I mean, even after this show is over, like Paris, you go to you arrive in Sao Paulo airport, and there's Paris Hilton ads all over the airport, and watch companies and perfume lines and all these things. So those they can just make a fortune. Japan too, right?
Yeah, for some reason, a lot of people who aren't from the West point west. Yeah. And it's not a grass is greener, because I think everyone's intelligent enough to go, these Kardashians are making us insecure with all their ass implants and there's Instagram fakeries, but for some reason it's just the weirdest form of idolatry. It's the weirdest form. I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about vendors, since you threw taqueando. What was that like dealing with an analog vendor. Like they weren't digitized, so you had to speak with. I know that my dad was in the restaurant business, so you have to like deal in cash and almost word of mouth, and it's like a pain to get someone to sign something because okay, I guess this is trust. That analog minded, almost like bartering system.
Well, I mean, you know, I've been doing events in Los Angeles here for a long time,
Sure,
and going back to like trying to think of like the first. So I remember the one of the first ones I remember was that there was a Beverly Hills Food and Wine, and Evan Kleiman had asked me to bring some vendors, and at the time it was like it was new, and so I rounded up 5 vendors, and it was really hard. Believe me, it was really hard to do that at the time
sure.
because Mexican street vendors, food trucks, you have to. It's about trust, and I was just really. I mean, back in when I was just blogging, I didn't go around. I just went around and ate at places and wrote about them. I didn't. I If I found out about the business, it was just because I was just a customer asking questions like, where are you guys from? I wanted to hear their stories, and and then they likely never even see it. And so it wasn't like I was there as a writer and I was being treated. I was just a customer. So I slowly started to build up a relationship as a customer because I would always go back to these places. I would bring friends, you know, and so when I did the 5 restaurants at that event, like I said, it was difficult. And I think the day of only 4 of them showed up. One never showed up, and they were
Oof.
just they were the hit of this Beverly Hills Food and Wine event, and it was, and then there was one year that the Taste and LA Food and Wine did an event together. They combined their events, and so Roy Choi had his taco um, festival part night, whatever, and they asked me to curate a handful of vendors again to help bring a little bit more credibility to their taco event in terms of vendors. And then I had also been asked to do this for LA Street Food Fest. So the first annual LA Street Food Fest, I probably curated again about 4 or 5 vendors, and then I did 3 of those events. Um, so and I was starting to bring people from Mexico, people that I knew from down there. So it all started kind of like, I'm doing this event, doing that event. And then when I got the opportunity to do Tacolandia, the first year I did that was when it started. So I went from 25 vendors to 42 vendors to um, 80 something, and then to 120. The last 2 years that we did it before I quit, we were up to 120 vendors. And so in a way, I kind of feel like the vendors and myself, we went through this process of trust, building the relationships, and also learning about the process. And so some of those vendors now are doing all kinds of events. Some of them went on to do other types of that. They do. You see them at LA Times Taste now, and it was because they learned that process. And so when I did Taqueando, it really wasn't hard to curate. I mean, I knew what I had to turn people down because of limited space
Mm.
and because I was looking for a certain kind of experience. So that part of it wasn't hard, and it wasn't hard getting vendors to do it. The hard part is, again, you're dealing with the sites, the venues. Everybody is just trying to make maximum dollar off of you instead of helping you make a successful event. And so we did something really amazing that first event, and is that I wanted to have LA Weekly didn't give a crap about the vendors, and
They're so busy printing up my digital flyers for hipsters to go to parties and shit. So
right. And at the and really while I had the team that worked with me, the people who own the magazine didn't give a crap about me either. And I learned that when they came down. They basically came and they wanted me to do a walkthrough with all the investors and owners to show them how to do a taco festival in all the markets.
And were
But
you established as Bill Esparza already then?
yeah, and
Mm.
and I was being, and I was being paid, and I had gotten a little bit. By the third year, they actually started paying me a decent amount, you know, and but the they wanted to expand Tacolandia and not include me at all. But they wanted my expertise and for me to guide them through the process. So, I just sort of like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna walk these guys around, but I'm not telling them anything about how I do things. And I just kind of told them, I used the time actually to pitch the owner, like, hey, I can if you wanted to expand this, I'd love to be a part of it, love to be on how to shape it the way it is here in LA. And he's just kind of like, nah, you're an LA guy. And I'm like, well, I just curated Bizarre Foods Guatemala. I think if I can do Bizarre Foods Guatemala from I can do Denver, you know.
Sure.
Because I was already
And I'm
working
not Guatemalan, by the way.
right. I was already working with product, I was working with zero point zero, all the production. I worked on Bourdain's shows, as a fixer on camera sometimes, and then but other times off camera, just consulting on and connecting people. I'm like, I can do this. I'm like, I'm a professional at this. But he was just like, he didn't even say hi to me. When I think the last year I did it, he didn't even come by and say hi. Like, never said thank you. Just a real jackass. And so when they got the new owners in, if it wasn't already bad enough, they were very pro-Trump people, and then they fired all the staff. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to announce on Twitter that I quit, and then I'm going to send them an I quit message. Right minutes after that, because this is just no. I'm not going to be a part of it. And they still tried to. I did meet with them after that, but I basically said, you you, you guys are going to try. You guys want to regain your credibility through me, and I'm just not going to do it. But I was already, looking. So what I wanted to do with Taqueando is I wanted to make an event that we cared about the customers, that we wanted to give them good. LA Weekly, to get to 120. Like I told them, I go, the relationships that I need to make 120 or 160 vendors is going to take a couple of years, because I can't just. Sometimes I would just go buy a place and I try it out. I said, I like this place, but they're not trusting. I said, why don't you come to the event, come check it out, see what it's like, or maybe I try them for the next year, but you can't do that and go from this leap from whatever we were at to 120. And so they started like, oh, we got these people and they say they'll do it. And I was just like, no, no, no. I go, okay, that can be. And that's a horrible position to be in, because it's making me be like, no, you're not good enough, and you are good enough, and you're mediocre for what the crowd wants, and you're gonna bring down the event. But I don't want to tell vendors that. I mean, I don't want to be in that position. I want to be able to say, this is the group that I want, that wants to be here, that believe, because there's people that I have great relationships with, but they're doing an event is not their thing, and that's fine. It doesn't affect me on the editorial side. It doesn't change anything that I do on the editorial side as a writer. And I always tell them, I go, look, you don't have to do. I don't want you to do it if you don't feel like 100% you really want to do it, and just trust that when it comes time for me to write about the things that I do, that it doesn't affect my judgment on that. Even if I have a negative experience, even if a vendor's horrible to me, I'm still, as a writer, I'm going to forget all about all that and just talk about their food. But we had a great customer experience. People were super happy. The vendors, we cut off the number of sales. We could have actually put in another 50 people, and we would have actually made money. Just 50 more bodies in there probably wouldn't have affected the event too much, but we made the decision like, okay, that's it. We're cutting it off here. We sold out the day before from our smaller number that we were going for. And so it was relaxed. People weren't complaining about lines so much. The vendors were having a good time. One vendor said he felt like He goes, I feel like I'm at a charity event, but it's not a charity event, and there's just really good vibes. And I think that was my goal, to not lose my ass, and and to make sure that people went away happy, and that the vendors like had a great experience and were valued, because they were not. I had to value them for LA Weekly, but now the event itself could value them, which was a nice change.
Do you feel like some of the vendors, coming from, I'm half Filipino, half Chinese, some of the vendors were like, "Oh no, that's not my lane," which is why they wanted to do it, but were acting afraid to do it. Did you ever experience that, or they were just, "This is so unfamiliar, Bill. I love you, but they're so like self-effacing and just want to be in a smaller lane"?
Um, well, when you are in our position, you don't just get to be a person that talks about food or a food writer. You do end up being sort of an activist and an advisor too. So some of these restaurants learned and they got it. So I would always explain what the benefit is, but and the other thing that I really worked on in the events is like, okay, now that you said yes and you're going to do it, here's how you can really get something out of it. So I made sure on the day of the event, I go around, I talk to every vendor, and I give them sort of a little pep talk for the day. It's like, here's what you're going to do: look your customers in the eye, say hello to them, give them a card if you want to give them a card, give them a discount if you want to give them a discount, or tell them where you're located. Do something to engage that customer that day, because this is your chance to get in front of a new audience. There's going to be I learned that from Roy Choi's team. They were at a food event, for another LA Weekly event, and I remember I witnessed. It was I think it's Alice. Alice, she's one of she was, or maybe still is, one of the Kogi people, and there was a guy that came up to the Kogi booth. He had one of the tacos, and he's like, "Wow, this is really good." He goes, "Do you guys have a restaurant?" And I'm like,
Goes to
and
show.
and he walked away, and I go, is there seriously a corner of Los Angeles where people have never heard of Kogi? She goes, that's why we do these events. And I'm like, okay. And so I took that lesson, and I always tell them about it. Like, look at Kogi. Look at this guy. He's, especially now, he's even, he's world famous. And I go, they still do these events because of this reason. They were still doing it. And so I do make sure that they're informed so that they can get the best out of the experience. I also tell them the truth about it. I go, you're absolutely in it. You are taking a gamble, and that's why you should engage the customers. It is a burden for you to take the day off, and it is an expense. And even if the stipend, we, so I, so for my own personal event, we actually were able to increase the stipend over what
Nice.
the giant corporate magazine would not do, you know? And so we increased the stipend because what we wanted the smaller vendors, to make sure and the thing that was really important to me is that we didn't treat people differently. There's all these festivals where celebrity chefs come in, they get way more money, and then they ask a black chef to come in, and they don't pay them anything. We made sure everybody got the same, no matter what. and but we raised it again to the detriment of profitability, because I wanted to make sure that small vendors could take the day off, and it would be less of a burden for them than it was when they had done the LA Weekly event with me. So no, I don't. I mean, I think sometimes there's been times when I've known people. I have a story that it's funny. I'm really good friends with Esdras Ochoa,
Don't know
who
who that is.
he's the founder of Mexicali Taco and Company, who's got Salazar, and now he's known all over the place. He was on the TV show, the chef competition. What's that? Final Table. And he's got a TV show on YouTube now, and so he actually, there was one day when I was talking to him about, and it was for LA Street Food Fest, and he was like, he did tell me, he goes, he goes, man, I want to do it. He goes, but right now I got my customers, like I know, I know what amount to bring, and they always show up and they're loyal, and like I just want to, I don't know if I can handle if a bunch of people start coming, like how he was thinking, well, what if a bunch of people start coming, and then but they don't come on Monday, they come on Saturday night, they show up right after the event, and then a few weeks later I'm stuck with all this product. Because so he was just like, he was thinking, I just have my cart and my and that's it, and it's safe. And I did say to him, literally, I said, I go, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard, that you don't want to grow your business. I go, you have something special, and this this is an opportunity for you to broaden your name here in Los Angeles beyond your crowd, and do something different. I go, I don't know. I mean, people do these events as a business decision. Don't do it because it's, and I always, again, I would always tell vendors that too. It's like, don't do it because you want to please me, because you don't have to. You don't have to please me. I go, do it because it's a good business decision for you, and I'm going to help you make it a better uh, day for you, is in the best way I can. And I always looked for, even though I didn't have to. I mean, LA Weekly did their own promotion. I would always do radio and TV stuff. Sometimes we didn't even need the sales. I did it only because I wanted other promotional opportunities for the vendors. So and I always moved. I didn't favor any group. I would always rotate it. I would find different people um, to do the opportunities, to take part in the opportunities. But so Esdras did this event, and of course today, I'm not saying I'm not claiming responsibility for his success. He is responsible for his success. I'm saying that was one instance where I sort of intervened and said, you that doesn't make sense to me. You're a business person. You're trying to sell tacos and make money, and I think this is a good investment for you. And so he did it, and he became a big star after that, because I think he felt confident and realized that he could grow and expand. And when he got shut down by the city, he quickly, investors came in, and they opened their first brick and mortar. And so, and that's really where his success began, was the fact that shutting him down gave an opportunity for him to find out that he had people out there that really believed in him, and that were willing to put down dollars to open a restaurant with him. And so yeah, there's been some things where I know people well enough where I can say, here's what other businesses are doing, and here's the opportunities you have. And and but I'd say going like from taqueando, and in the future, taqueando, when we can do it, 2022 is the earliest I think I can do an event again. I only want people that want to be there, and understand it. I don't want to convince people anymore, and I don't feel like I'm at the point now I don't have to. People, there's enough vendors out there that know what this opportunity is. And the other thing that I try to do is I try to keep one of the reasons why I'm very serious about the talent that's there, because I don't want my chef friends coming from Mexico and seeing vendors that don't um, match their quality and stature, you know. And whether it's if it's going to be a street vendor, there should be somebody that excels at their tradition and is doing something special. Because I think it's a lot of these chefs go to these events, and cooks go to the events, and are like, oh my God, like look who's here. And that's what it felt for me like the last year of Tacolandia. Is there was a lot of vendors that I felt lowered the quality of the people who made great sacrifices to come there from out of town. And so I want people to feel like, I mean, I think we're all like that, right? If we get invited,
Sure.
we want to be part of our peer group. We don't want to be in a position where we feel uncomfortable to be in there, like it hurts our brand or something. And so that's important to me, that everybody, I want these mom and pop vendors, and I want them to go over and talk to the chef from Monterrey or from Tijuana that came in. I want La Guerrerense to talk to Mariscos Jalisco, and for them to interact with each other. I think that's like really important.
Is there like a form of meat tribalism? Like, you know how with steaks is like, oh, I'm a bone and ribeye guy, and you fucking fillet fucks. You guys don't like tasty food. Like, is there like, oh, I'm a birria guy. You carnitas folks, you guys are cool, but these asada people, they're lazy. You guys are whack. Is there like a meat tribalism in strata?
No, no.
Mm.
I mean, no. There is definitely like a pride that people have in their towns and their states and their regions, and you know, they tried to do that thing with the mole festival here. Like they tried to do this thing of like this rivalry between Puebla and Oaxaca, and it never really surfaced. It was just a mole festival, and people tried different moles. You know, it wasn't really like a true rivalry.
Rocio Camacho, you ain't shit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, there isn't that. I mean, there might be individual things, you know, between vendors, and I mean, there's a lot of people in the birria scene, and I'm sure there's beef.
Nice.
I'm sure there is in there with because there's so many of those vendors, and they're all capitalizing on. You know, I would say that the most prominent ones, the ones that really started it, Teddy's and Birria Gonzalez. I mean, talking to them, there's definitely some things that have happened where people have copied them, even copied the design. Like Birria Gonzalez, that circular label that they have on the side of their truck, everybody's doing that now.
Bonds and Johns.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm sure there's I do occasionally have a few things where I'm aware of vendors I don't want to put next to each other, you know, and yeah, so yeah,
That's
so
through personal disputes.
that's personal disputes, and that's really rare, and that happens in all professions, you know. I mean, anytime you're having a big event, you have to be careful. You do have to be careful who you put next to each other. You know, we with LA Weekly, you know, one of their sponsors was like Vivid or something like that. You know,
Is in the triple X.
yeah,
Vivid?
and so I think one year they were next to I had which was Casa Vega there. I had Casa Vega, which I was really happy to have there because that's a great classic Mexican American restaurant.
Cadillac margaritas galore.
Exactly. Oh yeah, and she was not happy being next to Vivid, and or it was Vivid or something, or Spearmint Rhino or one of these things that was a sponsor of LA Weekly, and like okay, I was like, oh, note to self, next year I have to make sure that you know
Carnitas and dildos don't work.
Well, I mean, I don't want to put it next to somebody who's going to be uncomfortable, and I don't want to put it next to somebody who's going to be too comfortable. You know, it's like let's let it be somewhere where it's innocuous, it doesn't bother anybody, but but yeah, other than that, and the one or two little situations where people just don't want to be around each other, pretty rare, super rare.
You say something really important that I catch. When forgive me if I mispronounce it, birria.
That's fine.
You always mention that it's a pre-Spanish.
Yes, it's
dish.
a pre-Hispanic dish.
Please enlighten the listening audience and myself why it's important to say that, because the Castilians could be like, "Oh, you Indios and your messy, sloppy goat dish." Whatever, you know, there's a level of importance to you saying that, which I like to give you your flowers in stating that.
Well, yeah, the thing is the technique is adobo. So the adobo is where you make a marinade of chiles, and it does have a little bit of vinegar in there and something, which, you know, obviously there was no vinegar in pre-Hispanic times, but what a lot of people don't appreciate is that everything that was in the cuisines before the arrival of the Spanish was all, we already had all these things. We already had acid. We had before limes came, there was acid. There was other plants that provided these things. There were the quelites, the very powerful herbs. I mean, you can put eight spices in a dish, from the spice trade and make it really tasty, or you can put one hoja santa leaf and grind it up, and you're going to get major complexities from that in the dish that are going to interact with the meat, with whatever proteins and vegetables and stuff. It's going to be incredible. So we already had these complexities. We did have spices that were local. We did have all these things. So the idea of making a chili paste and rubbing protein, and again, we had pigs. They weren't domesticated pigs, but we had wild boar, we had peccari, and we had all kinds of animals, deer, and of course armadillos and all kinds of turkeys, all kinds of wonderful proteins that were available that were used in these dishes. So whatever you're doing, beef, if you're doing goat, you're doing lamb, you're doing whatever. Birria is the name of the technique in the dish, and you can have a birria of anything.
Okay.
So one thing about the Spanish language is that the most important thing comes first in the name of the dish. So it's birria de res. It's a birria, but it's beef. It's birria, it's goat, So you're using that same technique, but the original one is the one they do in Jalisco, and they were doing that before there were goats with other animals. They were doing this technique, and originally it's a pit roasting tradition that now is done mostly in ovens, or large pots with aluminum foil rigging inside and grates to control temperature, things like that. But and then of course the Tijuana style, the one that everybody's crazy about, is a stew. And you can there's birria. There's a simple one that we make at home. If you make that adobo and you cook your meat in it, that's a birria. It can be more of a guisado, or it can be more of a stew like the Tijuana version, or it's roasted meats like the one you find in Jalisco, or nearby Michoacan, Aguascalientes, where my family's from. We do birria. Zacatecas, that's that oven roasted ones that they do. And anytime you have a longer cooking process, you're obviously going to get more flavors and more complexities and more range of the textures and all these things, right? So the original birria is a little bit more elaborate than the Tijuana one, but the Tijuana one is just it got popular because of the dipping,
Sure. It looks unctuous and almost
Yeah.
communal,
The funny thing about it is that birria means something awful and ugly, and
messy,
yet,
kind of, right.
yeah, messy, and yet on Instagram it's like sexy and hot and trendy, funny.
And that's why like people like you that puts food on the good blast, exposing it. What would be the Spaniards with their warrior garb go like, hey, that's messy native food, but to us now.
Yeah. Well, the problem with colonization is the fact that the colonizers get all the credit for cuisines. They get to impose their influence upon these cuisines. So, well, that's Spanish influence, that's French influenced, and it doesn't go the other way. So the story is Europeans just grabbed tomatoes and took them back, and they didn't study how to cook with. They didn't learn how to cook with tomatoes. Of course they did. Of course, they saw all the techniques, the way tomatoes were used. Tomato sauce, all tomato sauce is Mexican. I don't care if it's Italian on a pizza margarita, it's Mexican technique. But you never hear that. You never hear someone say, "Oh, this margarita pizza comes from Mexican technique," And to actually put tomato sauce on a flatbread, that's more Mexican than any kind of goat or beef in a stew that's already a Mexican or Brazilian stew or whatever, and all they're using is a commercial protein that was forced upon them. They didn't have a choice to use beef. They didn't there's always these wonderful stories about they didn't adopt a thing. It was mercantilism. They were forced to stop.
Barter and trade.
Yeah, they were forced to stop foraging and hunting, and they were forced to be consumers. They wanted the Spanish came and they enslaved the people, and then they wanted them to buy and consume their things. You know, the Mexican Revolution started because one of the things is that uh, Padre Hidalgo was teaching the Native Americans how to make their own wine, because the Spanish would not let people make wine in the Americas. You had to buy Spanish wine. So it's not adoption. Um, so yeah, I mean, it has nothing to me. It has nothing to do with Europeans at all. And unless we want to have that conversation about how cassoulet is really, you know, a Central American or a South American stew, or how, you know, gazpacho. We can just go on and on and on about so many Italian foods that are tomatoes are just all over, you know, all over Europe and the world. You know, chile peppers. I mean, all over Asia, you know, and Europe as well. Is no one ever says Mexican or Peruvian technique, and it's the colonizer controlling the way we talk about food, and which I noticed on Stanley Tucci's Italy. You know, they talk
Finding
about all
Italy,
these,
right?
yeah, he talks about all these influences, never mentions the Americas, and even Italian cuisine. There's always credit given. I mean, sorry, French cuisine is always given. The Italians are always given credit for Catherine de' Medici introducing fine dining that, in the court, that came into France. But if you look at those early menus, they were serving chocolate, they're serving tomatoes, squash, and they're using all these products that they had got from the Americas without ever saying that Catherine de' Medici's modern cooking was influenced by Native American techniques, you know?
It's always the privilege. Like if you come from a sponsored family like the Medici family, it's like it's
Yeah,
ours. It's like as the Spaniards bring over goats, therefore it is our dish. But we
right.
just changed the meat, you know. And I know I've dated a few Latin girls, and they talk about like the flamenco and how there's the porteros that claim from that, and that's a whole biblical conversation, which
Yeah,
I appreciate you always saying this is pre-Spanish, because that's really important. I've taken a lot of your time. I do want to talk to you or via email about the project,
yeah, please do.
Jen. But this is one important part too. With the Hawaiian culture, you know, they refer to whites or Caucasians as haole.
Yeah,
Um, and some people take that as pejorative, or to the Hawaiians, they say it's descriptive.
yeah.
The for you as a crossover personality also, has Pocho changed, or is it still, it depends on the context? Hey Pocho, it could be friendly, or hey Pocho, you know.
No, well, the thing is that when I was, you know, years ago, pocho was, yeah, it was an insult. It was basically a way of denying our history, you know. So the if you're from a place, and Guatemala, you're from Mexico, and you grew up speaking Spanish, and you have, you know, that's your first language. So one of the ways to exclude us from the culture was saying, you're not a real Mexican, you're a pocho, you know.
Sure.
And so that was just really just a way of saying, and without acknowledging the fact that I think one of the things that we've contributed to this discussion is, like, we both speak colonizers' languages, and we're just I speak English as a first language because of racism, not because my parents wanted me to speak English. But in the, you know, I was born in '68, man, the civil rights movement had just ended, and we were entering a period of I mean, my father is the walkout generation. You know, my father's generation fought the civil rights, fought for their civil rights, right? And so one of the takeaways was, okay, we have to, like, teach our kids English first, give them American names, so that we, not because we want to assimilate, because we just don't want them to be killed by police. Um, you know, we don't want them to be discriminated against. We want them to be able to get jobs. We want them to be able to not be harassed because they can't speak English well.
It's
And
safety,
so,
safe chameleonizing, right? To
yeah,
be a chameleon by safety.
right. So you know, the fact that I was taught English and I was denied Spanish. It was not just that I didn't learn it. I was forbidden to learn it and I didn't start learning until after my dad passed away, and so it's a deeply, I mean, it could potentially be deeply hurtful and insulting for me to think about that, but of course I'm not going to let that happen. But when somebody says, well, how come you don't speak Spanish first? I'm, well, it's quite complicated, but I'm speaking the colonizer language that of the place I grew up, just like you are. That's not our native culture, that's not where we came from. We didn't really have a choice, but now pocho belongs to us, and you can't insult us anymore. So somebody says, oh, you're just a pocho. I'm like, yeah, I'm a pocho, and that has a whole culture to it and a whole pride that, I think one of the wonderful things that's been happening in recent years with chefs like Wes Avila, and Carlos Salgado and Ray Garcia, you're seeing our culture now being broadcast nationally and internationally, and gaining respect for our traditions. And now it's very cool to be pocho. It's very cool to be Chicano, and so I think that's, yeah, we own it. We own the term now. No one can insult us,
Man, I didn't want to be so on the nose in using comparisons, even though the show's called Asian Unfiltered. But I think talking to you should set a good example for like Filipino Americans and Asian Americans who never spoke it because of his embarrassment, or you're not going to be accepted by the Euro culture. But it's amazing for me to hear like how gangster you are when it comes to LA Weekly. Fuck off. How you put both, I don't know how you do it, but both the Mexican and native Mexico culture on the good map. Phil Rosenthal uses you like in his last series. I think it was season 1 when you guys shot that in Mexico.
I was on season 1 when he was on, I want to say PBS, and then
Oh,
I did his second season on Netflix, which was the new show. I did two shows with him.
so you're both the Sith Lord and Darth Vader, because somebody feed Phil. A lot of people don't know I'll have what Phil's having.
Right.
So you cross generation Star Wars with that saber, and I will be emailing you. I saved a lot of questions in case you do agree to be part or a guest on Air
Okay.
Talent. But man, I really appreciate you, and a lot of people like you and Jen Harris are like the Jonathan Golds right now. You guys are pushing things really strong, and you guys deserve a fucking boutique of flowers, with everything that you do.
There was no Jonathan Gold without us.
I love that. I love that.
To
B-boy
be real.
stance.
To be real.
No, for sure. Because he needs his fellow generals to fight the war.
I mean, writing, no question there. An exceptional writer, but as far as knowing the cuisine and knowing what people are eating, definitely he was a follower, not a leader there, and I got the DMs to prove it.
Oh no, and that's why you deserve many a podcast series of props, bro. You really didn't mean to call you bro like that, but
no. I think I think it's actually an important part of the conversation to have. Is it, at some point we need to get to the place where it doesn't need the approval of the white writer or the white television personality, that our approval is enough, and in our community. So I actually, when I write, I do not quote. I mean, sometimes the editors come in with like, this actually came up in a recent thing, like that one of these people had been to this place. I'm like, no. We don't need the approval of the white guy that came there. And it's not a slight against them. It's that we don't need it. We're writing. I'm writing about it. And if I'm gonna quote somebody, I'm gonna quote another Mexican about Mexican food, or if it's a Guatemalan, I'm going to reach out into that community. I'm not going to go to somebody who just ate there because someone took them there.
Sure. We're not featuring it on the MAGA Food Network, so.
No. I mean, those
So
people all were led. They're all led to these places. You know, they're not, and they were explained what it was. So
yeah, but and in closing, like Phil Rosenthal, he seems like a genuine soul. So I'm glad he's getting his exposure too as the owner of ZPZ, you know.
yeah.
So but thank you again. I really appreciate you, and we'll keep in touch, sir.
All right. Thanks for
Appreciate you.
having me on.
Yeah, man. Fantastic interview. Thank you so much. Take
All right.
care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.